You were born into a world that forgot you on purpose, not by accident, not by chance, by design. While everyone obsesses over boomers and millennials, while the internet burns itself alive arguing about Gen Z and their mental health crisis, you sit in the corner, unnoticed, unbothered, watching the chaos like you always have. And that's exactly how you learn to survive. In silence, in the shadows. While everyone else needed validation, you learned that the world doesn't give a damn about your feelings. And somewhere in that cold realization, you became something they could never understand. Dangerous, self-reliant, immune to the noise. You are Gen X, the forgotten generation, the Latchkey kids, the ones who grew up with divorced parents, empty houses, and MTV as your babysitter. And while that sounds tragic to the soft generation that came after you, you know the truth. It made you a wolf in a world full of sheep. Let's talk about what really happened to you. You were raised by absence. Your parents were too busy climbing corporate ladders or falling apart in their marriages to hold your hand through life. They didn't ask you about your feelings. They didn't schedule play dates or worry about your screen time. They threw you the keys, told you to figure it out, and went back to their own problems. And you did figure it out. You learned to cook your own meals at 8 years old. You walked home alone in the dark. You handled bullies without running to an authority figure, because you knew no one was coming. This wasn't neglect in your eyes. This was training. This was the universe whispering a secret that only you were listening to. No one is coming to save you, so you better save yourself. While millennials grew up with participation trophies and helicopter parents hovering over every scraped knee, you grew up with nothing but the understanding that the world is indifferent to your existence. And that understanding became your superpower. You didn't need constant affirmation. You didn't need someone to tell you that you were special. You knew you weren't special. None of us are. We're all just atoms temporarily arranged in a pattern that thinks it matters. But here's where you diverged from everyone else. You took that meaninglessness and weaponized it. You stopped waiting for permission. You stopped seeking approval. You became a ghost in your own life, moving through the world with a kind of quiet competence that terrifies people who need audiences to function. You watched your parents' generation sell out. You saw them chase the American dream and end up divorced, medicated, and miserable. You watched them become corporate slaves, trading their souls for mortgages and retirement plans that never delivered the happiness they promised. And you made a decision, consciously or not, that you would not make the same mistake. You would not trust the system. You would not believe the lie that hard work equals success, that loyalty to a company means security, that marriage is forever, or that anyone in power gives a damn about you. You became cynical, yes. But cynicism is just pattern recognition for people who've been paying attention. You saw the game was rigged, so you stopped playing by their rules, and then the world called you slackers. They called you apathetic. They said you lacked ambition because you didn't want to climb the same ladder they were falling off of. They didn't understand that you weren't lazy. You were strategic. You were conserving energy for battles that actually mattered, while they were burning out, trying to impress people who would replace them in a heartbeat. You were building a life that didn't depend on anyone's approval. You freelanced before it was cool. You sighed, hustled before it had a name. You understood that the only security in this world is the security you create for yourself, and you went about creating it without making a lot of noise about it. Here's what they don't tell you about being forgotten. It gives you freedom. When no one is watching, you can become anything. When no one cares, you can experiment without fear of judgment. You didn't have social media growing up, documenting your every mistake for eternity. You got to fail in private. You got to reinvent yourself without a digital footprint haunting you. You made mistakes that stayed mistakes, that taught you lessons, that disappeared into the past where they belonged. You didn't grow up performing your life for likes and followers. You grew up living it, and that made you real in a way that's becoming extinct. You learned to be alone without being lonely. This is a skill that's dying. Everyone today is terrified of silence, of their own thoughts, of being disconnected for 5 minutes. They fill every moment with noise, with content, with distraction, because they never learned what you learned in those empty houses after school. That you are enough company for yourself. That solitude isn't punishment, it's power. You can sit in a room with your own mind and not fall apart. You can handle boredom without reaching for a device. You can think without needing someone to validate your thoughts. And in a world that's becoming increasingly dependent on constant stimulation and external validation, you are a rare creature, self-sufficient, self-contained, unbreakable. But let's not pretend it didn't cost you something. It did. You learned not to need people, which sometimes meant you didn't let people in. You built walls so high that even people who cared about you couldn't climb them. You became so good at handling everything alone that you forgot how to ask for help. You developed a deep mistrust of authority, of institutions, of promises, because you'd seen them all fail. You watched your parents' marriage fall apart. You watched the economy crash. You watched leaders lie. You watched heroes fall. And you learned that the only person you can truly count on is yourself. That lesson served you well in some ways. It made you resilient, but it also made you isolated in ways you probably don't even recognize anymore. You wear your indifference like armor. Someone asks how you're doing, you say fine, even when you're falling apart. Someone offers help, you decline, even when you're drowning. Because accepting help means admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability is a weakness you can't afford. At least that's what you tell yourself. But here's the dark truth you need to hear. That armor you built to protect yourself is also a prison. The walls you constructed to keep pain out are also keeping connection out. And somewhere in your pursuit of self-reliance, you might have become so independent that you forgot what it feels like to truly need someone, to let someone carry part of your burden, to trust that not everyone will leave. You mock the younger generations for their sensitivity, their safe spaces, their need for trigger warnings. And yeah, some of it is ridiculous. Some of it is weakness masquerading as self-care. But be careful not to let your toughness become its own kind of prison. Just because you can handle everything alone doesn't mean you should. Just because you survive neglect doesn't mean connection is weakness. The world taught you that emotions are liabilities, that trust is stupid, that dependence is dangerous. And while those lessons kept you alive, they might also be keeping you from truly living. You are the generation that invented ironic detachment. You made cynicism cool before the internet turned it into a personality trait. You learned to care about nothing as a defense mechanism, because caring about something means it can hurt you. So you became the masters of not giving a damn. You shrugged when things fell apart. You laughed when things got dark. You made jokes about the apocalypse because humor was cheaper than therapy, and therapy was for people who couldn't handle their own problems. And this served you. It made you resilient. It made you funny. It made you the generation that could stare into the void and crack a joke about it. But here's where it gets complicated. That detachment that protected you also disconnected you from your emotions, from other people, from the parts of life that require vulnerability to access. You became so good at not caring that you forgot how to care. You became so practiced at expecting the worst that you stopped hoping for the best. You built a philosophy around disappointment, around expecting nothing, so you'd never be let down. And while that protected your heart, it also numbed it. You stopped getting hurt, sure, but you also stopped feeling much of anything at all. And now here you are, middle-aged or approaching it, watching the world lose its mind over generations that came before and after you, still invisible, still forgotten, still doing what you've always done, surviving. But survival isn't the same as thriving. Endurance isn't the same as fulfillment. You can handle anything, yes, but handling isn't the same as living. You've spent so long proving you don't need anyone, proving you can take whatever the world throws at you, that you forgot to ask yourself a dangerous question. What do you actually want? Not what you can tolerate, not what you can survive. What do you want? Because here's the thing they don't tell you about being self-reliant. It's exhausting. carrying everything alone, trusting no one, expecting nothing. It wears you down in ways you don't notice, until you're already worn. You've been operating in survival mode for so long that you don't remember what it feels like to relax, to trust, to need. And maybe that's fine. Maybe you've made peace with it. But maybe, just maybe, there's a part of you that's tired. Tired of being the strong one. Tired of being the one who handles it. Tired of being forgotten, while simultaneously being expected to hold everything together. You are the generation that raised itself, and then raised everyone else's kids too. You became the middle managers, the ones holding companies together, while boomers retired and millennials complained. You became the parents who actually showed up, who learned from your own parents' mistakes, who gave your kids the attention you never got. And you did it all without asking for credit, without needing recognition, because that's what you do. You handle it. But who's handling you? Who's checking if you're okay? Who's noticing that you're tired? No one. Because you taught them not to. You taught everyone around you that you're fine, that you don't need help, that you've got it under control. And now you're trapped in the image you created. The strong one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't break. And maybe you don't break, but maybe you bend. Maybe you're bending right now, and no one can tell because you learned to bend in private, to crack where no one can see, to fall apart and put yourself back together before anyone notices. This is the psychology of Gen X. You are the generation that learned to survive without support and called it strength. You are the product of benign neglect and economic uncertainty and cultural shift. You are the bridge between the analog and digital world, belonging fully to neither. You are cynical but capable, detached but dependable, forgotten but functional. And that paradox is both your power and your pain. You need to understand something about the world you inherited. It was designed to break you. Not metaphorically, literally. You came of age during the collapse of every promise the previous generation made. They told you go to college and you'll be set for life. Then they made college unaffordable and degrees worthless. They told you work hard and the company will take care of you. Then they downsized and outsourced and eliminated pensions. They told you buy a house and build equity. Then they crashed the economy and took your homes. Every single institution that was supposed to protect you failed. And you watched it happen in real time. You were old enough to understand the betrayal, but too young to have any power to stop it. This is where your psychology diverges from every other generation. You didn't just witness failure. You witnessed coordinated, systematic abandonment. Your parents were too focused on their own survival to focus on yours. The government was too corrupt to care about your future. Corporations were too greedy to value your loyalty. The educational system was too broken to prepare you for reality. and the media was too busy selling you products to tell you the truth. You were surrounded by systems that claimed to exist for your benefit while actively working against your interests. And this taught you something profound and dangerous, that you are on your own, completely, totally, permanently. While millennials responded to this reality with outrage and activism, with demands for change and calls for revolution, you responded differently. You shrugged, you adapted, you stopped expecting the systems to work and started building your own systems. You didn't march in the streets demanding better. You quietly figured out how to survive in a world that wasn't getting better. This wasn't apathy. This was strategic acceptance. You recognized that you couldn't change the game, so you learned to play it better than anyone else. You became hackers of reality, finding loopholes, exploiting gaps, surviving in margins, while everyone else fought over the center. And this made you dangerous in ways the people in power didn't anticipate, because a generation that expects nothing can't be controlled by promises. A generation that trusts no one can't be manipulated by authority. A generation that learned to survive alone can't be threatened with abandonment. You became ungovernable not through rebellion, but through indifference. You stopped caring what they thought. You stopped believing what they said. You stopped playing by rules that were designed to keep you losing. And in that moment of mass disengagement, you became free in a way that terrifies the system. But freedom has a price, and the price you paid was connection. When you stopped trusting systems, you also stopped trusting people, because people are part of those systems. When you learn that everyone will eventually let you down, you stop letting anyone get close enough to try. When you build your life around the assumption that you're alone, you create a reality where you are alone. This is the trap. Your self-reliance became self-imposed isolation. Your strength became a barrier. Your independence became loneliness that you're too proud to admit. Here's what the world doesn't understand about you. Your cynicism isn't negativity. It's realism that's been battle tested and proven accurate. You're not pessimistic because you enjoy being miserable. You're pessimistic because you've watched optimism fail 1,000 times. You've seen what happens when people trust too much, hope too hard, believe too easily. They get destroyed. And you decided early on that you would not be destroyed. You would not be the person crying about broken promises, because you never believed the promises in the first place. You would not be devastated by betrayal, because you never trusted enough to be betrayed. This is dark wisdom. This is the kind of understanding that only comes from being burned repeatedly until you learn to live in the fire. And it served you. It made you resilient. It made you realistic. It made you someone who can handle crisis after crisis without falling apart, because you've been in crisis mode your entire life. When the pandemic hit and everyone else panicked. You barely blinked. Economic uncertainty. You've been dealing with that since birth. Social isolation. You've been practicing that for decades. Institutional failure. That's just Tuesday for you. The world finally caught up to the reality you've been living in all along. But now we need to talk about what happens when survival mode becomes your permanent state. When you spend 50 years operating under the assumption that disaster is always coming, you never actually relax. You never actually feel safe. You never actually trust that things might be okay. Your nervous system stays activated. Your guard stays up. Your walls stay high. And you tell yourself this is strength, this is wisdom, this is how you survive. But what if survival isn't enough anymore? What if you're ready for something more than just not dying? The younger generations don't understand this about you. They think you're emotionally unavailable. They think you're cold. They think you don't care, but you care deeply. You just care quietly. You care in actions, not words. You care by showing up, by handling things, by being reliable, even when everyone else flakes. You don't talk about your feelings, because you were taught that feelings are weaknesses, and weaknesses get exploited. So you care in the shadows, in the margins, in the quiet ways that go unnoticed, because you also learned not to expect recognition. And this is where the psychology gets really dark. You've been invisible for so long that you've started to identify with the invisibility. You've worn it like a superpower, the forgotten generation, the ones who slip through the cracks, the ones who get things done while everyone else takes credit. And part of you likes it. Part of you enjoys being underestimated. Part of you gets satisfaction from proving people wrong without them even realizing you proved them wrong. You've made a virtue out of being overlooked. But here's the question you need to ask yourself. Are you invisible by choice or by conditioning? Did you choose to operate in the shadows? Or were you forced there so many times that you forgot you had the option to step into the light? Because there's a difference between strategic invisibility and learned helplessness. There's a difference between choosing not to be seen and believing you don't deserve to be seen. And somewhere in your journey from latchkey kid to self-sufficient adult, that line might have gotten blurred. You learned early that asking for attention was pointless. Your parents were busy or absent. Your teachers had too many students. Your bosses had their own problems. So you stopped asking. You stopped reaching out. You stopped expecting anyone to notice you, unless you were actively on fire. And even then, you learned to put out your own fires. This made you competent. This made you reliable. This made you the person everyone depends on. But who do you depend on? No one. And you're proud of that. You've built an entire identity around needing no one. Self-made, self-reliant, self-sufficient. But self can also mean alone. And alone can be powerful. or it can be painful, and sometimes it's both at the same time. You've spent so long being the strong one that you forgot what it feels like to be vulnerable. You've spent so long handling everything that you forgot what it feels like to be handled with care. You've spent so long protecting yourself that you built a fortress so secure even you can't get out. This is the dark psychology of your generation. You are masters of endurance, but amateurs at joy. You can survive anything, but you've forgotten how to thrive at anything. You can handle pain, but you're suspicious of pleasure. You can be alone, but you struggle to be together. You've optimized for worst case scenarios for so long that best case scenarios make you uncomfortable. You don't trust good things because good things have always been preludes to bad things in your experience. And the world reinforced this over and over. Every time you started to hope, something fell apart. Every time you started to trust, someone left. Every time you started to relax, disaster struck. So you learned that hope is dangerous. That trust is stupid. That relaxation is a luxury you can't afford. And you built a life around those lessons. A life that's stable and secure and completely devoid of the kind of vulnerability required for real connection. But here's where the shift happens. Here's where the darkness becomes fuel instead of prison. You need to understand that the same traits that isolated you can liberate you. Your self-reliance means you don't need anyone's permission to change. Your cynicism means you can see through the bullshit that keeps other people stuck. Your independence means you can walk away from anything that doesn't serve you without looking back. You've spent your whole life thinking your psychology was a burden. What if it's actually your greatest weapon? You know how to be alone. This means you can make decisions based on what's right instead of what's popular. You know how to survive without support. This means you can take risks that would terrify someone who needs a safety net. You know how to handle failure. This means you can attempt things that someone afraid of falling would never try. Every single survival mechanism you developed can be repurposed from defense to offense, from protection to power. The younger generations are out here, paralyzed by anxiety, unable to function without constant validation and support systems. You don't need any of that. You've been operating without it your entire life. While they're waiting for permission, you're already moving. While they're seeking approval, you're already building. While they're afraid of failure, you're expecting it and planning around it. Your psychology, forged in neglect and sharpened by disappointment, makes you unstoppable if you choose to use it that way. But you have to make a choice. You have to decide whether you're going to keep using your survival skills just to survive, or whether you're going to use them to dominate. Because right now, most of you are stuck in maintenance mode. You're handling your responsibilities. You're paying your bills. You're taking care of your families. You're surviving. But you're not conquering. You're not building empires. You're not taking what's yours. You're just getting by. And getting by is an insult to everything you've endured. You survived a childhood that would have broken softer generations. You survived economic crashes and job losses and every institutional failure imaginable. You survived being forgotten and neglected and told you don't matter. And you're still here, still standing, still functional. That's not just survival, that's dominance. But you need to recognize it as dominance. You need to stop seeing yourself as the forgotten generation and start seeing yourself as the generation that doesn't need to be remembered because you're too busy actually doing things while everyone else is performing for audiences.